it's always bizarre to me because like people finish the game and they'll have made some interesting comments as they play through it. They'll get to the end of the game and they'll go, "Whoa, well, guys, like and subscribe."
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no, but I want to hear your thoughts. Like, if I'm watching you play, surely I want to hear your thoughts. I'm here for you. So, like, yeah, tell me how it made you feel. But maybe that's just because I made the game. But I feel like it would be more entertaining just as a viewer. Maybe I'd watch more YouTube playthroughs and stuff if that was more of the done thing. People actually like analyze the way things made them feel.
On this episode of In the Footsteps of Giants, Richard and Tony sat down for an interview with the YouTube channel Potions and Pixels. They have very kindly allowed us to post this audio as part of our feed as well. This is part 2 of that interview.
Let's go back to Amar's earlier question that he had about the camera controls, because this is one of the areas of interaction. He said, can they go into the camera views? There are no camera options to show all characters, and I feel like having them sitting on two sides was a cool intentional or non-intentional move. And he says again that he wanted to just understand how you guys chose which ones to show at any given time, or to allow the player to choose. Any thoughts about that? What were the camera controls?
Do you want to talk about the choices between Night Fisherman and Outcast Lovers, and then I'll talk about like how the mechanic was conceived of?
Sure, because I can't remember how the mechanic was conceived.
Okay.
But,
Perfect.
yeah. So like first of all, I should preface this with like the mechanic is not good. I feel like it's effective. Obviously, we've done it for a reason, but like, you know, trying to make decisions with the mouse while also us needing you to use the arrow keys and stuff, like the UX is bad. And we're designing better ways to tackle it. But in terms of the choices that get made, so in the Night Fisherman, it was very simple. I just took, I studied the cinematography of the Inglourious Basterds scene, and I looked at what camera heights they were using and what closenesses they were using, and I decided to have 5 simple cameras. So there would be a duo shot, and then a medium over the shoulder on each of the characters from behind the other, and then a close-up of each of the characters. The decisions to like change the camera and force the camera changes are mostly to draw your attention to a new thing that's occurring. That's exclusively what it is in Night Fisherman. And it's to draw your attention to the boy in the back of the boat. Some people don't notice him the first time it changes the camera because they're focusing on the text and not studying the details, and it's quite dark and everything. The intention was there to like sort of mirror the view of the Jews under the floorboards in the film, but it's a very different shot.
Yeah.
But then after releasing The Night Fisherman, we noticed that there were a bunch of people who were choosing to opt out of the mechanic by just sitting on the duo shot. And they felt safest there because they felt most in control, because they could see both boats, they could see both men, and they could just sit there and watch. And if the camera moved away from that at any point to cut away to the boy in the boat or anything, they were hammering the keys until they could get back to that shot that made them feel safer.
I might have done that myself, I think.
Yeah. So when it came to Outcast Lovers, I thought, you know, what experience do I want to create here? Do I want to allow the player to not engage with the mechanic? Preferably not. But do I want them to have a safe zone where they feel more comfortable? No, I don't. So the decision was made there. There is a camera in the game that we could have implemented. It's ready to go. And that does happen at some point in the logic flow when you're first introduced to the scene, where you see the whole scene to establish it, and you've got the two women on both sides of the table and the boy there as well. But I don't allow you to use that in the rotation of cameras that the player can control, because I don't want you to have that respite, basically. Like, you always can't see at least one character as things are going around. And like, as in Outcast Lovers, there are men approaching over one of the characters' shoulders through. You can see it through a window. They're outside the building. You can only see that from the one specific camera angle. So, and that camera angle, other than that, only features one of the characters. So, if you want to see the other characters, anyone who's not Ola, the one you're playing, you have to be looking away from what the men outside are doing. So it creates a sense of unease, which I think was successful. I like that about the game. The thing that was unsuccessful about it is that there are people who felt that who just couldn't cognitively engage with both things at the same time, and found it very confusing. So I think in the future we're going to try to include a version where the camera changes maybe naturally as it would in a film, unless you have been engaging with the mechanic. But if you don't engage with it for a couple of scripted camera changes, then it will go back to... Or maybe it will just be a director mode versus a cinema mode or something. That's less elegant, and I don't think I want to do that. But
I want to say I've seen a few games that have done that. None immediately come to mind, but they have the kind of... I'll have to go back into my mental archive and try to see what games have done those type of camera controls.
We didn't pull that idea specifically from any game, I don't think. It came from Ring of Fire because we had the ability to look around the room. We like that we can author basically a background once and then use it multiple times for different shots.
Yeah.
So like the master shot will be the idea that is concepted and painted, but then the other shots are just close-ups. I think it's most closely tied to Subsurface series. The Circular series, and but they didn't do it quite the same way as us. They didn't give the player control. It was just an authored part of the narrative, I think. So where the idea came from, actually, there's only one time in the narrative that the game wrestles control over the camera away from you. Is that right, Tony? In both games, and it's to do a reveal.
Yes and no. There's more in the second one. In the Outcast Lovers, there was right before we were shipping it, there was like some issues that we encountered with the thugs approaching outside. I keep calling them thugs because that's what they're called in the like asset thing that we imported.
These are,
but
assuming EPG
the officers,
members.
They're actually from Immigration Enforcement.
These are them. Oh yeah, okay, that's right.
Government agency. But the officers are approaching outside, and there's bits where, because we don't have any idea how long it's going to take the player to read a given section, particularly people with English as a second language. It's really difficult to time their approach so that it happens. So basically there's an overly complicated system where there's like various waypoints that they're moving towards, but at certain points we need them, if they have not already reached there, to jump forwards. So and there was, I couldn't think, because I'm a bad programmer, of any good way of doing this. So literally they just get moved, like shunted forwards, and the camera cuts just as that is about to happen, so that the player can't ever see them like just jump forwards by 20 meters in a single frame, and that's it. It's as dumb as that.
Got it.
But generally speaking, other than to hide something, it's to show you something that it gets used, and it's just for reveals.
And I like the fact that it felt like we kind of discussed this in our indie game club discussion, where in this situation, even though you're choosing the dialogue with the limited interactivity, it feels like an area that you can control and hold on to. And so it kind of encourages the player to control the camera even more so. And so I think that's also something, going back to the component about discussing levels of interactivity, is you can actually stress certain types of interactivity by limiting others. So I found that a fascinating component as well.
Where that actually originally came from, I've remembered it now. The very first nugget of a reason why the camera mechanic made it in there was literally, we had a short conversation about, okay, how do we make this more interesting so the player has something to do with their hands? And I threw the idea out. I have no idea where it came from. There wasn't any particular one thing. But I just wanted to author some camera angles that looked nice. And I was like, what if we let them direct it? I'll just change the camera. I remember at first Richard was like, but what's the point? It's not serving anything. And we still probably have to ask ourselves that. But that's where it came from. And I started playing with it. And we demoed it to some peers where I was like, we were on like a Zoom thing. And I was showing them what happened in the game. And it was like 2 days into the prototype, very, very early. But I really enjoyed presenting, like streaming it to them and choosing the camera angles on purpose to tell the story my way.
Yeah, I love it.
So the whole thing kind of built out from there. I think both those games are actually best played to an audience. And this is something I like about it because I often play games and my wife will be in the room like watching or like, doing something else but passively kind of watching, and if things get interesting will be attention on the TV. So I like things that you can present it in your way.
Let me ask you guys.
You spent a lot of time on the Tsushima photo mode as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I do that in all the games, all the like big AAA games that I end up playing. I always spend loads of time in the photo.
Yeah,
like
framing a scene.
Up.
Yeah, I love
sometimes
that.
more than I do just playing.
Interesting.
It's good.
So where the camera mechanic originally came from. So I will preface this with both me and Tony, me more so, are not very good programmers. I am an animator artist, and Tony is a writer, designer. And so I was given the task of creating the fishing mechanic for the Night Fisherman in the first instance in the prototype week. And I tried my best, but having actual fishing experience, I really struggled to take that idea and convey it mechanically. I was going too far down the route of trying to simulate how a fishing lure would sink and rise and sink and rise, so that you could idly fuss around with something fishing rod while you were reading the text. I wanted that
the original idea of something to fiddle with.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I wanted that contrast of something to fiddle with, something to do with your hands, which is why I think the camera controls are on the left and right arrow, and the up and down arrows are reserved for the fishing mechanics.
Gotcha. Okay, so that was the original decision. Yeah,
may come back at some point, I hope, but I don't think they will. And so at the last minute, we made the decision to cut fishing. This was like, I don't know, day before the end of the week or something. We're like, it's not happening. Kill it. We're like, okay, well, what's left? And the only other thing we had left in the game, apart from text, is we have this tool called Cinemachine, which is owned by Unity, and it lets you swap the cameras around, which we tend to do through the narrative. But I think Tony had the idea of just attaching it to some keys, and then I created the logic of bouncing around sort of in a star shape between them, and then arriving on a hidden camera as part of that. But I would love to extend it and assign them to like numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something, because at the moment it's accessible to push between them, but if you're actually trying to present it like you're a YouTube player or something, you end up with these like weird half shots in between your cuts
as you're like trying to rapidly jump across.
Interesting stuff there.
But
I
wish we'd actually designed a real directing mode.
Well, it makes me curious about future work that you guys will produce. A lot of this stuff, it's going to be great to like look back at this conversation once you guys are down the road with more, and just see all the changes that you will all implement here. John O'Reilly saying it's nearly tea time in the UK. Can't interrupt tea time, so we apologize to those in the UK as well as Tony or Richard. I don't know how my aunt lives in the UK, and I don't know. I've been a few times, but I don't know how much the tea time is religiously observed right now these days. So apologies if we are interrupting your cultural traditions there.
Big shout out to John as well. Much love.
Awesome. Shout out
to
John. Fantastic. Thank you, John. I got a couple quick questions on this. I'm laughing because, when we originally set this up, I was like, hopefully we can do this all in an hour. But knowing myself and knowing this format, I just get too into it. So I appreciate you guys still sticking around because we still have a little bit more to go with the Imagine Leviathan Ring of Fire.
I talk a lot.
Well, and it's all good. Let me know if anything, and John sending his love. Thanks, John. But a couple quick turbo questions, I guess, before we move on to Imagine Leviathan. Overall, do you guys like the idea when you said that you like people streaming this and sharing the experience? Do you guys like the idea of streamers reading the dialogue or not?
Yes.
Yes?
Love it.
Richard? Tony?
It depends how well it's done.
Yeah.
I've seen some, and it's been brilliant, and I've really enjoyed it. Weirdly, more frequently by people who don't speak English as a first language.
Interesting.
But then some other ones are like maybe tonally inappropriate for the game. And that's partly our fault for like not being fully upfront about what the content's going to be. But it's funny, like I'm thinking of some specific YouTube playthroughs where the person starts off going like, "I'm Churchill with the EPG," and, like, being very joking,
like,
and then all of a sudden, like he's pointing a gun at a child, and
and then by the end of it,
holy shit!
Yeah, exactly.
And you see people's faces kind of fall, which is itself entertaining. So.
Oh, I think that's what happened with mine. I think Omar mentioned that on that. Was just my eyes and face turned red, and I think that's the tricky part. When I was playing Wide Ocean Big Jacket, I was able to like get the characters like speak it like in a way where I feel like I could provide some sort of like entertaining stream. But for this one, I don't know if I did the best job because it's just like you even once you start digging in a little deeper and you know what kind of content you guys at Far Few Giants produce. It's like, I don't want to make any jokes or like anything. I'm just gonna be it's hard to know how to. So I was curious what you thought about that.
It's interesting, like when they finish playing and they have like a few minutes to do a wrap up, that not a lot of people would actually sit down and consider what the themes were and what it meant, because they're thinking a lot about how their audience is going to take it, and they don't want to politically divide their audience when they're only just starting off a YouTube channel or something.
We definitely scare people occasionally.
Yeah,
it's always bizarre to me because like people finish the game and they'll have made some interesting comments as they play through it. They'll get to the end of the game and they'll go, "Whoa, well, guys, like and subscribe."
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no, but I want to hear your thoughts. Like, if I'm watching you play, surely I want to hear your thoughts. I'm here for you. So, like, tell me how it made you feel. But maybe that's just because I made the game. But I feel like it would be more entertaining just as a viewer. Maybe I'd watch more YouTube playthroughs and stuff if that was more of the done thing. People actually like analyze the way things made them feel.
And that's what we're going with this program as well. We wanted to have these more in-depth discussions. I personally, it's interesting. I spent the last decade or more of my life as a community organizer working in the nonprofit front. So I've always had in the community here, I'm either known as like the game guy or the activist guy, depending on the circles I'm in, because of my long history in both. And so this was kind of a perfect opportunity as someone who's worked primarily on environmental issues, but immigration and a whole host of things. To me, this was kind of a great... I think this is one of the reasons why I gravitated towards this content. I think in this day and age when more people are waking up, so to speak, to a lot of these issues through various means, I think I can only imagine that this content will become more and more appealing.
Michael, now I want to interview you.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question as well.
I didn't know that was your history. Like, I want to know. Maybe it's not the venue, but I want to know.
Deeply involved in activism. You can, I guess, Google my name if you can spell it. I'll send it to you guys afterward. But yeah, very involved in a wide variety of things. I used to work for a sustainability organization here. Before that, I spent years at Greenpeace. I was really heavily involved in the Occupy movement. Moral Monday movement. I've been involved in local and state level politics for about a decade or so. So a lot of activism and working on labor issues, environmental issues, you name it. I've kind of a lot of these things kind of are so intertwined that the nature of organizing has required us to, it encouraged us to realize that we need to work with people who are experiencing struggles that are all intertwined, or oftentimes we hear the term intersectional. So yeah, this is kind of near and dear to me in that regard. And also why I think maybe my interpretation of the imagined Leviathan was what it was. And after last night's show, I actually played it all again, and I think I went even deeper into that interpretation.
That was a beautifully done segue there, Michael.
Yes, I did. I'm trying. These are like my new tactics here. So if you guys don't mind, let's check out the trailer for the imagined Leviathan, and then we can jump into that. So this is the imagined Leviathan.
"50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. Such fact impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable. And that was all. It did not lead him to meditate upon his frailty as a creature of temperature, and upon man's frailty in general, able only to live within certain narrow limits of heat and cold. And from there on, it did not lead him to the conjectural field of immortality and man's place in the universe."
So that was a bit from the imagined Leviathan, the latest game from our friends here at Far Few Giants. This game is a bit different in some ways, and in some ways it's not. I think it has the in what it shares is this beautiful contrasted colored look, some of the narrative delivery, but in some ways it's not, because this is in comparison to the previous two games we discussed, this one actually has you more in full control. There can be an end state. How would you all describe this game to those who are just watching this right now?
It is more so a game than our previous games.
It's first of all a survival game that has one single stat essentially to manage. So you're freezing to death, and you need to not freeze to death. It's like minus 50 degrees. It is set in a near future version of Britain, where basically a day after tomorrow style climate catastrophe has occurred, and everything's covered in a meter or so of snow. It's like in another ice age, and you can't thrive in this game. Like it's just about survival. Like, can you get to the next set of resources? Then there's also the layer of like, I guess you've got your permadeath from the survival. You've got your poetry from these audio logs that occur. That if anyone's played The Witness, it's sort of similar to the audio diary things that you gather in that game, but a bit more ghosty. And it also has horror elements to it that people don't always notice because they're very subtle.
Yeah.
That's it, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of so it's kind of a walking simulator with survival elements, really stripped down survival elements.
I've got somewhere on my desk. Here we go.
Oh yeah.
A slow-paced, poetic, visually stunning trip through climate-ravaged Britain. That's how somebody described it to us.
Okay, and so that immediately gets me excited to discuss this, because I don't know if I saw ahead of time. I don't think in y'all's description it has the overt reference to climate change or things like that. So, so that was my kind of interpretation, and I guess it's more than that, because there are those specific quotes, and we should say the voice you hear here in the game, if it's not immediately apparent, is the voice of Tony here. And so there's some of these sections, and we should give a shout out to Amar as well. If you watched last night, he was saying this reminds me of the To Build a Fire by Jack London, and then immediately we brought that up as well.
If you saw our pitch presentation, that is one of the first references.
I love it.
I have a screenshot of To Build a Fire by Jack London, and I played a shit ton of The Long Dark, and I love the their like hardcore survival mode in that called Interloper. I got really, really into it a couple of years ago. It kind of helped me out of a dark place. It kind of gave me like something to focus on when I was not in a good way. And I wanted to capture that feeling, but I wanted to do it in a really simplistic, like focused way. And when I was looking at our inspirations to build a fire, there's a really beautiful animated short on Vimeo which recreated that story. And I originally just wanted to turn that into a game and just focus on building the fire falling over, you becoming progressively less and less resources till you're just burning a box of matchsticks and trying to prevent your fingers from freezing off you. That sort of thing. We didn't quite nail that, but that was the intention. And I feel like in future
we didn't
iterations...
simulate those things, but I feel like we came close to the, like, evoking the feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, especially with the whole component about, which I didn't immediately understand, I should say, on kind of my first playthrough, the whole idea, I kind of got it, but not quite, the whole idea that you have essentially, so for those who are watching, when you're constructing these fires, part of it is you need life, which is essentially kind of the text that you find, these kind of quotes and narrative tidbits. And part of that is actually you kind of have these choices of destroying life in order to warm yourself, or destroying this kind of these narrative pieces to keep yourself alive, because you can die in this game. And so I think that is kind of interesting too, in giving the players, I guess, a bit of choice over what was the idea behind that. Did you guys want like it to be like, oh, I don't want to get, you know, it pains me to have to get rid of like elements of the narrative, so you're sacrificing potential story in an effort to save yourself, which kind of goes, Richard, towards your point about limited resources, surviving.
Yeah, there was a strong focus on not having the thrive aspect of survive and thrive you get in survival games, where we didn't want to give you an infinite backpack. We didn't want to give you the ability to manage your inventory. I actually, the way the text is implemented at the moment is not my ideal situation. It's like it is one layer abstracted from the simulation. And yeah, it comes down to Tony. You probably you wrote the mechanic. You probably have a better understanding of it.
The idea, which was not perfectly executed, but the idea was to have this layer of selection. So when I played The Witness, I really loved that it acted as this litmus test for myself, basically, where as I was going through passively listening to these wildly different philosophical positions, or just, you know, moral, ethical positions, some of them I wasn't focusing on them, but I would naturally find myself nodding along and agreeing with, and then other ones I'd find myself just, no, I disagree. Like, basically any time there was some in my example, the like religious theologist philosophy stuff in there, I was like, this isn't for me. But when it was like, you know, the Confucian stuff, I was agreeing with it. And I wanted to have a similar thing, but also, but like mechanize that. So the player would be gathering these different little tidbits of story or poetic readings, and they would want to hold on to whichever one they felt was most important, that they agreed with the most, that they connected with the most. So there'd be a process of elimination by which at the end of the game, when you reach this monolith that you're supposed to inscribe something for future generations on, you have held on to the one that you felt you connected to the most, and then you inscribe it there for future generations. So you were supposed to learn a little bit about yourself, I guess, by playing the game, by being presented with these different existential crises, and seeing which one it was that you felt was most important to communicate, and to keep hold of the warning against. But because the fire building mechanic was not the clearest in the launch day version, which we're patching like tomorrow, I think. People got a little bit confused and ended up like burning a load of things that they didn't necessarily want to. So the choice wasn't being so conscious. They were more getting like just the version of it that was in the witness, where they just experienced these things.
Gotcha.
And then responded to it, but they weren't necessarily like by process of elimination working out which one they cared about the most. I think a reasonable number of people came to understand how the mechanic was working on extra playthroughs. The game generally requires restarting quite a few times to actually reach the end. It's challenging. So I think there was a number of people who got it, but I don't know if it was the majority. I think most people kind of like got to that final choice and were like, I don't know which one's the most interesting. Maybe I haven't even listened to this one yet. I'm just going to put this one on there.
Sure.
And then you kind of get an ending and that's it. And maybe you think about it a bit, but it's not like you maybe haven't got what I wanted, which is that you learn something about yourself.
Yeah. Let's talk about that specific piece. This fascinated me on so many levels, and I want to dig a bit deeper into that. So I mentioned this briefly on our Let's Discuss episode yesterday, and I honestly wish we had more time on that because there were so many other elements I really wanted to dig deeper into. But you mentioned at the top of this specific, talking specifically about the Imagine Leviathan, that the climate change component, it felt like very much that as you're experiencing this, you're experiencing the aftermath, this post-human world that is suffering under the consequences of an exploitation of people and the planet that occurred beforehand. And there's a lot of reflection of this. I'm wondering, as far as like the choice of the Leviathan itself. So my interpretation of that was this Leviathan is that especially when you're saying the Imagine Leviathan, it's this one of these things that currently, as we speak, we're all going through a worldwide pandemic. We're still experiencing climate change. We are still experiencing exploitation of human beings across this planet, and yet there isn't the willingness to act that there needs to be in order to counteract and move in an entirely different direction. So I'm just curious about that Leviathan piece, the kind of the Cthulhu-esque creature.
Before you move past that, I really want to hear, what is your definition for what the Imagine Leviathan is? Just for my own benefit, I want to hear.
Yeah, and it's probably one of those things that I'm going to need to play a bit more to be satisfied myself with that interpretation. But the imagined Leviathan, to me, and I'm starting to hesitate now. You're getting nervous. You're called upon by the teacher or the authors themselves. But to me, it almost felt like the imagined Leviathan was the looming end of us, so to speak. That we it's there if you want to see it. And there is a significant portion of the public that chooses to either actively not want to see it, or kind of takes an ignorance is bliss mentality, whatever it may be, or embraces ignorance to the point where they're wrapped around in conspiracy. So that was my interpretation of the Imagine Leviathan. That it's clear, if you actually wanted to take the time and look, that it is something has a looming presence over us. But yeah, how did I do, teachers?
10 out of 10.
Perfect. Hey, okay, that feels great.
So, the intention is that this is not an original concept. It's something that I took from Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation. He introduces the concept in this one metaphor of the Imagine Leviathan, which we then expanded into basically the whole game, the whole game's text and subtext, which is that Imagine Leviathan is something that is so overwhelming to think about, such a huge existential threat, or just so outscaled compared to yourself, that your mind can't look at it. Like, you can't think about it and actually address that in the forefront of your brain.
Yeah.
Not for long anyway. Otherwise, you would go insane, and people do. People get when I say insane, people have psychotic breaks. People get incredibly depressed. when they really sit with and think about constantly the reality of the situation that we're all in. And so, yeah, as you say, people ignore it and will embrace ignorance as a virtue and that kind of thing. So the society that we present in the game, where they're going to the Steelhenge and inscribing messages, a warning of things that we didn't think about, that were our Leviathans in the past, is trying to... They're trying to enshrine in tradition introspective time to actually think about the existential threats. Like, to sit and think, are there any Leviathans I'm currently avoiding thinking about? For whichever people come after the person that you're playing has in the game. But it's not just a climate change. So it started with climate change. The game in its first iteration was just about the looming threat of climate change. But then when we came round to the second iteration, that felt shallow. Like just having all the quotes be about how cold it was and that sort of thing, felt like it was kind of missing the point. And the real thing I wanted to do, which is encourage people to think about, those things that are going on in the back of your mind that you just cannot sit with, and really consider. It meant that I had to basically take a piece of paper and write out every existential crisis I've ever had, which you can probably tell by the way I speak is numerous. So like, I'm at the desk at the moment. Here we go.
I remember you telling me about that, and it was a hard day for you.
Oh, wow.
This was my detailing of all the existential crises.
Yeah. And I think upon repeated playthroughs, I was able to kind of see that with the exploitation of people, the whole idea. I guess it almost feels like there's almost like a guilt as well about the gaming component, or at least escaping into games, and that games themselves could be potentially responsible for exploitation as well.
When you write, I tend to find that you discover things about yourself that bubble up through the writing that you didn't know was something that was going to be there. You didn't know it was something that was bugging you and in the subconscious of your mind. So that definitely happened with this, in exactly the point that you just made, where I'd like fetched a bit on Twitter about like the paradox of like being concerned about all these massive things and existential threats that could destroy humanity and are destroying humanity. While also like spending my time making entertainment software very inefficiently. But I wasn't thinking about that going into this. So I was like, talking about the desire to live ethically, about climate change, about the fact that death can occur at any moment, about the hundreds of millions of people that are starving right now, and simulation theory and the Fermi paradox. Not all of these things necessarily made it in, but it started to become a common thread, and that's when, to me, these were not the same character when I started. But then as I started putting, actually like writing the things that I was going to record, it became obvious that actually they were the same character, and it was just basically a fictionalized version of myself. It's not me, but like it's my shit that's coming through. So yeah, there's definitely guilt in there about spending my time on something that's ultimately frivolous. There's a couple of them, and also like the conspiracy theory one is probably like one of my favorites, because I think lots of people aren't expecting to hear it go quite so batshit. Like it's very, very serious, and the other quotes are very serious, and then next to a 5G tower you find like this one quote that is about how like lizard people run the world and stuff, and they're descended from ancient Mayans or something. Yeah.
You also from the UK, right?
Yeah. But like, I've been there. Like I've got so depressed and so incapable of handling the world that I wanted to see some kind of order desperately enough, and to feel special desperately enough, that I bought into conspiracies at one point in my life. And so yeah, I don't know. This is a bit of a ramble now.
No, this part hit me like kind of especially hard, because as I kind of I tend not to, in these interviews, kind of bring my own personal background in here, but
No, do it. I demand it.
Okay. Well, that's the interesting thing is all my life I wanted to be involved in the game industry. My father was a computer science professor, came to the United States. Like, it was just something, a dream I had my entire life. And in end of high school, towards the end of high school, college, my father unexpectedly died just out of the blue, which deeply affected me in a way that probably kind of launched me on this path, which I can share many of your thoughts on trying to live an ideal lifestyle from a moral standpoint. In fact, I probably took it as extreme as like your average person can truly go. So it changed I've been a vegan most of my life. I don't have a car myself. We have one for the family. The nature of Charlotte almost requires it, but I gave up it. All my clothes were secondhand. I even went to do projects where I went to Nicaragua to visit factories there to make sure the clothing was, sweatshop free. And I wrote about these things, worked on these things, worked on climate change issues, arrested many times for activism, disrupted many of a shareholders meeting. This was my life, and I embraced this.
You're my hero, man. Fuck.
Well, the funny thing is, but what you said there, it's like, it's interesting to me because like I felt so strongly that as much as I loved games, I needed to be doing something more meaningful, so to speak. And yet I've completely, I'm embracing, with Potions and Pixels being a nonprofit, we do a lot of, our primary work is in the community. Like we do, we teach people electrical skills, like working on arcade machines so they can get jobs as electricians. We help with that stuff. We help with like youth programs. We work with government. So we do a lot of these things to help. And I've found that these combinations of what you all are doing, I guess what I'm trying to do is address your kind of existential concern, because I honestly, I genuinely am saying this not just to kind of alleviate any concerns you all have personally about this, because it seems like a big thing. You're a Leviathan looming over your mind, but I genuinely think the work that you all are doing is incredibly important in reaching an audience. And it's a testament. I think the fact that there's not much of this type of art out there, interactive art of this type that is out there, that needs to be out there, that this is the exact type of stuff I want to see. I don't think it's necessarily one of those things of necessarily fully retreating into one of those worlds. I've kind of found, maybe after having children, maybe after just in my 30s now, but this is exactly the type of stuff I personally am looking for. And I think it allows people to understand themselves in the environment in a way to where you can make subtle changes in your life, subtle changes to, I'm a big fan of what you said. Our everyday decisions kind of not only define us, but define the world we live in. So making sure that the products you're purchasing are not contributing to exploitation the best we can, because it can. In my case, when you talked about the conspiracy road, I kind of went to a place where I was deeply depressed because I couldn't even look up like where was this pen manufactured that I'm purchasing, to the point of such extreme asceticism, where giving up like all of trying to give up as many of my material possessions as possible in order to truly try to avoid this, the Leviathan. So I just wanted to, that's my little rant for the moment, to really say how much I appreciate what you all are doing here, and the fact that you all are tackling this subject matter when you guys could easily cover your standard AAA fare and probably be financially better off, but you all clearly have a message you want to say, and I, for one, and I believe our audience as well, just thanks you all for your work and appreciates it so much.
Thank you very much for saying that. It means a lot to hear.
Yeah.
Hopefully it reaches more people, and we can do it sustainably and like encourage other people to do the same thing. We're working on trying to with a couple of other creators at the moment on something, but I don't want to spoil because it's not really one place, but like we're trying to popularize the short game format basically, so that this kind of work can be done. Mm-hmm. But part of that means not just changing how platforms serve up this work or make it financially viable in that way. Like, you got to actually demonstrate value and go to people where they are and try and like change audience behaviors, so that people are playing this kind of stuff rather than sinking their 7,000 hour into Dota or something. Yeah. Which is fine as escapism, and I mean, the society we live in, it's impossible to be 100% ethical, and sometimes you just need to rest, and it's fine to play games like that. But I feel like really it should be balanced with something maybe more nourishing.
Totally agree.
Personally, and maybe I sound like a massive twat, but
no, it's true, and we need a kind of a cultural shift in terms of just what we. I think the initial reaction to a lot of this stuff kind of speaks volumes as well, in terms of people kind of going in blind, not knowing. We've been so conditioned on what to expect with games that when we are confronted with like a work of art like this that demands us to think and act differently, there might be like that moment of dissonance where people don't quite get what to do next, but hopefully they're intrigued enough to want to explore and dig in further. This has only been out for a week or so?
A week.
A week. Okay.
Yeah. We it's currently in open beta. Like we have a couple of different phases of our month, so we tend to launch the itch version out of closed alpha into open beta, and then 2 weeks later we launch on Steam, which is the official launch. So hopefully by that time we would have seen a bunch of YouTube playthroughs. We would have had friends and family play through it, give us feedback. People would have found most of the glaring bugs, that sort of thing. And so when it comes out on Steam, it's like more of a solid thing.
Gotcha.
I was just going to say, this is also, we haven't talked about this, but it's been by far the most technically challenging of the projects that we've worked on.
I was going to say that.
Sure, that seems to be the case, yeah. With the amount
the
of
other
content.
ones, we they were intentionally designed, like I explained 2 hours ago, that it was supposed to just be like a 3D environment that was attractive and nice, but it was limited content. It wasn't going to take us months and months and months to build, and all the gameplay was in the text layer, so I could produce it very, very quickly and cheaply. But with this one, with it actually just being a survival game and the text, there's probably less than a page of text overall in the game. It's all to do with the presentation and the way you interact with it, and the survival mechanics and how they make you feel is way more technically challenging. We brought a programmer on board full time to help us do it over the last month, but even then, it was super difficult. I'm very much looking forward to. I think next we're going to do another narrative game in the following on from Outcast Lovers in some way. So I'm really looking forward to going back into the comfort zone temporarily.
I want to ask you all about that, because just hearing everything you're saying makes me think I know the answer to this question. But it seems like you all are very committed to this one game a month schedule, and
as much as we can. Regardless, occasionally we run into speed bumps and stuff.
Sure,
we're trying to release something by the end of each month,
which I think is great. Limitations oftentimes breed great creativity, so I think that is great to hear. And also just challenging yourself to constantly produce, I think is wonderful. And I'm super excited to see, because every time we're getting something from you all, I got to say I was a little disappointed. I think when I first messaged you guys were like, for the time, we're not going to immediately continue the Outcast Lovers. And I was like, I was sweating a bit, because I was like, does this mean we're still going to get another game? Will it be kind of in the series? What's gonna happen next? And so when I saw, and I think you guys messaged me about this as well, to see that this game came out, I was super excited. And that's why we had to add it to the last week's episode to make sure, or this week's episode, I should say, to discuss it. Can I ask you, we have one of our guests last night, Madam Funsize, Jessica, said that she wanted to know, you guys might have seen this. Let's see, right here. She found
the Scarecrow.
Yeah, she found something super fascinating that we were all interested in right here. So check this out. I'm sure you guys obviously know about this. I'm saying check it out as if you guys didn't know that this is in your game. But Jessica, I think, was the only one to outright find this. I played multiple times and I didn't see this necessarily myself. So can you give us some insight into this? Because Madam Funside is eagerly awaiting to kind of know. She says, "I want to know about the devil dude!" 3 exclamation points.
Okay, so I want to preface this. I know Richard wants to answer this question, but I want to just get in ahead here and say that in the last couple of days before we were ready to ship this to Itch, we realized there wasn't quite enough variety in the landscape. So while I was doing a load of other things, Richard just added just went kind of wild and added loads of assets to the project. And I think it's great. It's come out really good.
Including
But
the feather.
I haven't, yes.
Yes, I
but
love the
I have
feather.
no idea why some of those things are there. So I'm just as eager to hear
This is the
as
best
you.
answer possible. I love this.
Right,
Richard,
so-
please solve the mystery for us.
I want the detailed lore of
Let
why
us
that
know.
Scarecrow is there.
Why the Scarecrow is there? So
Ad-lib it.
when you start the game and you go into the first copse of trees, there is a signpost that points either right or forwards. The idea being, if you follow the path right, you follow the power lines, and you end up at the house. You end up doing a dog's leg over to the Steelhenge. However, if you just wander out into the void, you don't really know where you are. You don't know what you're going to encounter. It's inherently more scary, even though it is a straight shot from start to finish.
Mm.
And that kind of ties into the idea of it being horror. A horror game. We wanted it to have elements of horror.
Sure.
Specifically, we wanted to invert the horror. We didn't want to make a dark game, but we wanted to include a lot of the ideas you see in horror genre, like the sound effects, the visuals that kind of make you doubt yourself. And if you travel in that vector, you will encounter a few different things. There is a giant skull buried deep in the snow that you can only make out that it's a skull from one specific direction. It's like, I don't know, 10 foot big. And then you can see these skeleton limbs branching off in different directions from that, and like fingers sticking out of the ground. So that is one of the horror aspects of it that you probably won't encounter because it's relatively hidden out in the fog.
And funny enough, Madam Funsize says she's found it both times. She said, scared the shit out of me when I saw this, plus the big thing above. LOL.
Yeah. So then, when you're wandering in that void area, there are these big blocks that just look like cylinders. They're actually haystacks, like hay bales, that you would see this time of year in the British countryside. And so you're in a field, and it just made sense to me to have a scarecrow, because I was planning to put crows in the game that follow you around, kind of like that film. I think it's Hitchcock, The Birds, and just have these crows harass you around the level, which is why there's crow feathers falling from the sky, which are actually quills. They're not feathers.
Okay, gotcha.
And
they are flammable, I guess, importantly.
Yeah. Tony did that. He was like, I don't want to carry around something that does nothing. Let's make it flammable.
I've been wrongly accused, actually. It was our programmer, John, who did that, but I took the credit.
It makes sense. And yeah, and so that's why it's there. I was planning to add more elements of like cultist decoration to the game. Like I was planning to have what's that film with like the little stick weavings?
Blair Witch Project style, like the cultist witch style things.
Yeah, Wiccan statues and stuff. I got about halfway through that list of stuff, and I think someone just, because there was something interesting there, someone put a quote next to it. There's another 5 or 6 objects in the world. It's kind of like a virtual museum. Like you can see bits of my artwork scattered around, and someone may or may not have put a quote next to it. Like you may have encountered an orb on the hill. That was a specific piece of artwork.
I think the further you get away from the safe intended path, the more of like a psychoscape it becomes. Like on the standard path, it's all very like mundane. The things you find are like a car, signposts, 5G signal tower, the house, some benches, until you get to the Steelhenge thing. But it's like when you're out in the white, in the scariest part of the game, you can find those like weirder, bigger, more psychological threats, I guess.
Yeah, can we talk a bit about those threats? While we're doing this, I'm trying to find the name of a game that there's an element that reminds me of, and I'm hoping to do multitask
Is
here
it
with
the
this.
White Swan?
No, which is a great comparison as well, but it is
Unfinished Swan, right?
Unfinished Swan.
Amnesia?
Yes. No, Amnesia is a great comparison as well. That's also one that was in my mind. Amnesia and Unfinished Swan, but there is a game that I should say. So we do events in Charlotte as well. We've hosted about 400 or so gaming events over the last 4 years. A lot, mainly multiplayer, indie game focused. And there was a student-made game that has been wildly popular at our events. It's a multiplayer game that's in black and white, and it's not necessarily relevant from a gameplay standpoint whatsoever. But it's one of those things. You know how it is when the name of a game is on your mind. I'm sure I'll find it while we discuss it. But
So the black and white aesthetic, is that what you're interested in?
well, yes, because there's the parts where you see the creatures, which I wanted to ask about the creatures. And the only time you can actually see the creatures is when they cross over the trees or the shadows of the black aesthetic. And so there's a game that specifically focuses on that mechanic where all the characters are either black or white. So yeah, I'm curious about that, and I know Tony, you gotta bounce here momentarily, so maybe we can show the Ring of Fire right after this and get some last closing thoughts.
Okay. So the black and white aesthetic came from Inktober. I made some 3D scenes that were black and white as part of 3D Tober, just because I could make them in an hour. It was super quick, and I really, really wanted to make a game that was based around that aesthetic. And then we sort of ideated Imagine Leviathan as a way to deliver it. I didn't actually at the time. I didn't think that it would be possible to make a game with that aesthetic, but we kind of did it, and it's interesting. It's I think it's challenging for the survival genre. It's a really big step out, I think.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love the look there. For the sake of time, let's show the Ring of Fire teaser, alpha teaser video, and then let's briefly talk about that before y'all have to jump off. So this is Ring of Fire. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me do that again. Ring of Fire. So that was Ring of Fire, which I absolutely love that trailer, and I really enjoyed playing the game. Tony, since you have to leave, maybe Richard, we can keep you for a few minutes afterward, or if you gotta jump as well, that's totally fine. I know I've grabbed you guys for far too long, so I apologize to your family and friends.
It's been my pleasure. I just I have to go help my friend move a fridge out of his house.
Okay, got it. Got it. Well, can you, Tony, before you jump, can you tell us about Ring of Fire, maybe next projects you all are working on as well, and maybe just some closing thoughts from you?
I would love it if the Outcast Lovers and Night Fisherman shared its world with Ring of Fire. I feel like it was built in a way that could definitely be possible. So maybe it's part of the same story. Ring of Fire is a detective game, like we mentioned earlier. I really, really love games that make me sit there, like Heaven's Vault or Her Story, with a physical pad of paper and actually make notes and work out for myself. Because when you do that, when you require like the person to do a little bit of cognitive work and to input their decisions with a very wide possibility space for what their input is, they feel so good when you actually crack it and solve it, and you're so much more invested. Like if it's LA Noire style, where it's like, do I think this person's lying? Yes or no? Maybe I'll delay. like if I decide yes and I'm correct, it's like, well, there was a 1 in 4 chance, and for some reason, just because it's a single button press, I don't feel like I own that decision. It wasn't really me. But if, like, in her story, I have put like a reference to a man being present in a scene, and then like a separate reference to like I don't know, there was someone I was in love with or something. I could be like, oh, okay, wait a minute, did that person have a did that person have a were they having an affair? So you type in affair into the database, and suddenly you get a load of videos that refer to her having an affair, and it telling you that. That's not spoilers. I can't remember if it's in the game. Like, that feels so good, that moment, and you get so invested in it. So what I wanted to do is produce that feeling of investigative, deductive, like, joy and satisfaction at it actually being you that solved it, not your player avatar in a game. It's you. And I wanted to apply that to people investigating topics that I cared about. So it happens in a post-climate change world. This time it's a utopia that's successfully adapted to it. There's all sorts of stuff about identity politics in the game that is directly tied into how you solve cases, because people have different mask identities and all that kind of jazz. So, yeah, at a roller coaster pace, that is my my top line most favorite things about Ring of Fire.
And so currently it says Ring of Fire we may see in 2021. How are you all feeling about that? Obviously, with coronavirus and so many other factors at play, and this release schedule that you guys have of another game every month.
So Ring of Fire, like we said before, we pitched it to publishers for a long.
We had a momentary. We were towards the end of our conversation, and we suddenly got disconnected. I think primarily from Facebook, but we are back here. You'll notice Tony had to leave, but we have Richard here for a few more moments. So I appreciate. Thank you, Richard, for sticking around here. Just to have a few more questions for you before we formally end things here. But as far as Ring of Fire, a couple things I wanted to ask about that, because as I don't know our ages, ages of you all relative to me, but immediately, like, one of the first games that came to mind was Deja Vu, which came out for the NES. I don't know if that's one that you remember or not, or of course, like the Phoenix Wright series. There's so many kind of different detective games, and what you mentioned earlier about Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, that was one of the first games that came to mind as soon as I started typing specific addresses and referencing different things. And as I mentioned, Chronicles of Crime or Detective, or a lot of these modern board games that employ some sort of technological element. So can you talk a bit more about the other inspirations for the gameplay as well as the aesthetic? Because I absolutely love the mask thing. The with one of the detectives wearing a deer mask, it just looks so cool. And that becomes a part of the story as well, that you start to understand why people are wearing masks in this society. So maybe can you share a bit about that?
Sorry, remind me, what was the first question?
Yeah, it was about 40 questions.
Deja vu.
This is
so I don't know what Deja Vu is.
Yeah.
I'm 28, and Tony's 28 as well.
Okay.
I never had any Nintendo consoles apart from maybe a Game Boy, which I only had Pokemon on as a kid. So I don't really know those references. Tony I think he's played all of the Phoenix Wright games. Is that what you were referencing?
Yeah, Phoenix Wright.
And he's not a fan. I think at some point we want to do a Phoenix Wright game and do it our way.
Got it.
Potentially about the Salem witch trials.
Interesting. That would be very fascinating.
A modern take on that, yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
And so when we were ideating Ring of Fire, I was actually watching a YouTube channel, I think Game Maker's Toolkit, where he specifically was reviewing detective games. And looking at our game idea through that lens and thinking about how we can adapt those ideas. That was a big part of it. So like the biggest problem at the moment with Ring of Fire, we like it as it is, but commercially it doesn't work because it's not multi-platform. Typing on the keyboard, as soon as you speak to anyone with any amount of of money. They're like, doesn't work on any other console, any other platform, and so therefore it's not viable as a business model. The game, and so in the next iteration of Ring of Fire that we may not get to release, but it's kind of like episode 2. We reworked the whole typing mechanic into a notepad system. So every single string, what we call strings, which is just a sentence or a word or a phrase, is a button, is a selectable object, is basically an item that you can drag into your inventory, which is your notepad, and you can then rearrange those words, or you can scribble and you can connect them in different ways on the screen in a little area of the corner of the screen. And then you can drag them back out again into different interfaces, whether that's the sat nav to help you get somewhere, or the search bar to help you look up something.
I love that.
Or onto another character potentially to question them about it. That solves the problem of it being multi-platform. But the way that it is at the moment, we like it. We like it being tactile. And we've had a lot of people complain, like, "Oh, you forced me to get up and get a notepad. I've not used a pen and paper in the last 6 months at my desk or something." And typically programmers say this, and they're like, "Oh, your game doesn't work if I have to Alt Tab," and I don't mind that at all. Like, I want to make it uncomfortable for people.
You seem unafraid to go against every convention of whether definitions of games, interactivity, like comfort level and storytelling, but also comfort level, like you said, in terms of demanding more from the player in different ways.
Yeah, but that's intentional. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, on that point, like, part of the reason why our games are very deep in their philosophies is because we have this limitation of making a game a month, and we have this limitation of making games that are roughly 10-20 minutes long. I feel like it is a struggle for people to engage with short form content unless it has a particular message that it's trying to address. And we're definitely doing that with the collective that we're going to be releasing a bunch of games through. Like, all of those games have an interesting mechanic or an interesting idea, or they talk to an idea or a theme that isn't usually explored in mainstream games. But back on Ring of Fire, to your other question, the aesthetics and the mask. So the masking comes from this book. I mean, Private Eye is itself a really interesting comic. So I think it was released all for free, and then I bought the hardback edition, which kind of mirrors what we're doing with like releasing our games and then hoping to have like one final version of it that is a paid version.
Yeah.
But specifically with Private Eye, it's about the release of data to the public. So all your private emails, and your personal information, maybe your like history of your identity, is released online. And so there's a complete unveiling of any privacy. And in that book, they are a detective and they are trying to track down various criminals. I don't know exactly what the case is. And everyone wears masks and everyone wears costumes, and it looks like a Halloween parade when they're walking around on the street. And we definitely took a lot of inspiration from that. You only see glimpses of it in the game at the moment. We never had the time to create extra characters, but we have them concepted. Every character has their own government official mask. The masking, it is done both officially and unofficially, depending on, and that you can have multiple identities. So you as an individual, you may own 2 or 3 different masks, or you may own and 2 or 3 different identities. Because the idea of identity in general has been broken down.
It's a really fascinating idea.
Yeah, and and then you can just find every piece of information you're ever going to want to find through this database about anyone. I think probably in the aftermath of the recent problems in America, we would need to revisit you playing as a police detective. But you play as this jaded detective who's she's not a hero. She's very much an anti-hero.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be really interesting to see people role play as her and to come across decisions that they don't agree they don't agree with the choices, and just to really live in that muddy gray area of narrative choices. I think Disco Elysium did that really well recently, which was only in development when we started, but it's definitely a big inspiration to us now.
Yeah, this looks amazing. It has kind of the signature look that you guys have. I guess more in this case, a bit more in the way of color and control. And I absolutely am looking forward to this, hoping to hear positive news about the development of this game. And
it's not a small game, right? It's intended to be kind of like Kentucky Route Zero or something, to have like 6 episodes.
Yeah.
And we want to tell a bigger story with it.
Yeah.
I think the way things are working out, we may well release 1 episode at a time, similar to what we're doing with The Night Fisherman and other things. We may release like an hour's worth of content at a time, which is weirdly a like controversial choice with players. Like they all just want to. A lot of the ones we speak to just want to play the finished version. They want to play the intended experience from start to finish. But from a business standpoint, it makes a lot more sense for us to build the audience as we go, to release prologues, to gather excitement like from the audience, to maybe even get early bits of funding in. All of that builds towards a greater finished product.
Sure.
So it's going to be interesting balancing those two things. But also, like, if we had to go away for 6 years and build something, we would give up. We'd be bored and give up. So we'd much rather have that like quick iteration cycle and keep things moving.
Which is also exciting for us as fans of y'all's games, to be able to get a chance to experience a wide variety of different content each month and throughout the year. So we're super excited about this. I really appreciate both you and Tony joining us today. Like, this has been I know we went like massively over time, so I'm so appreciative of y'all's patience, and this was really exciting as someone who's a big fan of your work, to get a chance to kind of hear it directly from you all and get to explore and discuss these deeper topics and get an insight into the development process.
It was a real breath of fresh air when we saw your review, because or at your discussion club, because we hadn't seen anyone really talking in depth about the topics before, at least in a video format. And I feel like that's sorely needed. When I watch television shows like, I don't know, Game of Thrones or even Walking Dead or whatever, I will seek out discussions, I'll seek out video reviews and stuff where they talk about the themes. And it was kind of a fanboy moment for me to discover someone's created that about our games. That was pretty fun. I was like sat here the whole of last night watching your Imagine Leviathan review with a big smile on my face.
I love
it. Just like every time you mention something, I'm like, yes, that's right. You got it.
Awesome.
And you were like just on the edges of figuring out something, and you were like, I wonder if that was intended.
Yeah.
And it was almost entirely, totally intended.
That makes us feel great too. I mean, we love producing this type of content. We think that there are plenty of people who hopefully who like these types of in-depth discussions as well, and want to dig into this art form that we all love so much. And it gives me immense pleasure to hear that you get pleasure from watching us. So it's like an infinite a loop here of excitement and appreciation. So I definitely excited to hear you say that, and I'm looking forward to each game that you guys will be releasing. We have some great content to discuss on future episodes of Indie Game Club, so you can count on us to analyze and pick apart your work and go in depth with it. So thank you so much for that.
I'd be interested to hear in your future episodes how our games relate to you as an American. I think you might have touched on it before about
question.
like the borders between the US and Mexico and stuff.
Yes.
But like we are specifically telling stories about Europe and about Britain and the UK. But I'm really interested to hear your opinion and your side of things on over in the US.
That's a great point. I think that's something we'll probably, we'll have to dig into deeper, because I mean, both of our countries are kind of, as you all were saying, have been on somewhat of a similar trajectory for some time now, and maybe in unfortunate ways, and in some ways fortunate as well. I think we've seen kind of an awakening across both sides of the pond, and people kind of demanding social change. So there's we should say that there's some encouraging things to consider, it's fascinating to think about that designed from this kind of European perspective, but something that we can certainly relate to, and doesn't feel alien to us. So I think you all are producing content that's very relatable.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Richard. I was going to ask you one last question, but what you got one more thing for me?
And I was just gonna tell you that we have a podcast and stuff, but
yes,
we'll talk about that after.
Well, last thing, I just want to hear quickly, what are you playing outside of out of your own games? This is the last question that we always do for every one of our shows. Just a quick question of curiosity. What's on the docket for you?
I'm yet again playing Creature in the Well, which is one of my favorite games. Beautifully art directed. I highly recommend picking up the art book for that. I love the top down gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to make a game that's top down, like a Bastion type game.
Yeah,
like a dungeon crawler. And mechanically, if it's like a pinball game, so it's just full of juice. It's just full of joy. All my favorite things. I wish it were longer. I wish there were more of it.
There's another game that employs those gameplay mechanics, or somewhat similar, not fully, the pinball-esque mechanics. It's on Game Pass right now. I don't know if I can't remember the exact name, but you can check it out on Game Pass.
I did just play. I should probably mention this. I played Volcano Pinball by Sock Pop, which I think just came out last week or something. Another team who are making they're making bi-weekly games, which is crazy.
A lot of content for sure.
Yeah. Big inspiration to us.
Yeah.
So do you need to plug anything?
No, we'll plug that on our future show. So let's go.
Okay.
Let's go straight to you. Plug away. Tell everybody. We have your social media information right above us right now.
Yeah.
So people can follow you, Tony, as well as Far Few Giants. And in the description, we also have the social media information for Richard Campbell as well, who did the sound and music design. Yeah,
Richard Campbell. You don't think about it when you're playing it, or even when you're making it, but half of the experience is music and sound.
Absolutely.
It's mostly the way we can get away with having bad animation is because the sound is so good.
It all combines so well, for sure.
Especially on the Leviathan, he did an amazing job. Plug to Ricky there. And so we have a podcast. We've been doing a monthly podcast called In the Footsteps of Giants, which we post about on our Twitter page frequently. We post it in our Discord. It's a monthly post-mortem of how the game that we just finished went. But it's so much more than that as well. It's like we're dealing with running an indie business. We're dealing with like marketing. So the Night Fisherman had a crazy launch because it came out at the same time as the Itch Black Lives Matter mega bundle and got included with that on the top spot for the opening weekend. So we saw higher numbers for that game than we probably will for any other game this year, because of that, and that's had a massive repercussion on our business. And we talk about depression, like we're quite open about mental health issues. We're quite open about indie game production, like what it is actually like to work on a game every day, and what it's like to schedule that work, and working from home, especially during coronavirus, is takes its toll, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
and where can people find that?
Quite open. You can get it on every platform at the moment. So if you just type in the Footsteps of Giants on your podcast app, it will come up. It's on Spotify, it's on Pocket Casts, it's on iTunes, all your regular places. We tend to link through to Anchor FM, which has all the links in it.
Got it.
And we partnered with a journalist called Johnny Cullen in Ireland, where we are, who runs a website called Play Diaries. So he has a bunch of podcasts where he interviews developers. So he hosts that for us, and we have a guy called Stuart Neill who is our presenter and our interviewer. He's got his own podcast called How Not to Make a Game, which has got a bunch of great interviews on it as well. So I recommend checking both of those out.
Yeah, we'll link to those. We'll do some more social media posts about this interview, and we'll spread the word about that. We'll include links to that as well.
Great. I think that's everything.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Richard. Thank you to Tony as well, who had to jump off recently. Something just got in my eye a moment. To move a fridge, he had to jump off. Well, we really appreciate it. Like I said, we initially thought this would be... I don't know why. This is my classic problem.
An hour.
Yeah, I was like, we could do this. And then I got to thinking, as soon as it started, it's like, I have all these questions and thoughts about 4 games, as well as y'all's background. It's impossible to consider an hour nearly enough time. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And thank you to our viewers on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. We so appreciate it. And make sure to check out the work from Far Few Giants. We absolutely love it here at Potions and Pixels, and we think you will too. So we encourage you to take the time. It won't require too much time, so don't make it an excuse, and go check out The Night Fisherman, Outcast Lovers, The Imagined Leviathan, and you can also play a prologue portion of Ring of Fire. So go do those right now as we end the stream. Yeah, we'll end it there. Thank you, Richard. Look forward to talking to you and Tony more and discussing your games as well.
Thanks, Michael. And hopefully people came back after the drop streams.
Yeah, and
or this will be spliced together.
We'll make it work somehow, or we'll add the links. Yeah, that's one of the tricky things about doing live and splicing them. But we'll share a few links, so we'll make it work.
Okay. If you stuck to the end and you haven't played our games, what are you thinking?
Yeah, if people are just like, what's going on here?
If you haven't already, please follow the show on anchor.fm. You can also follow us on Twitter. Far Few Giants is at Far Few Giants. Richard is at AnimTree. Tony is at Anthony_DE_fault. You can also follow me at Saintly Stuart.